Welcome. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And this is James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and we welcome you back to another episode of The New World Next Week. I'll apologize. It's my fault. We were not here last week, but we are back yet again. And, of course, you can find everything you need at NewWorldNextWeek.com. James, you and I, as we always do, kind of collaborate before these episodes. We kind of put forth the idea of, hey, let's try and do another all-positive episode, or at the very least, a not negative episode. So here we go. Our first story, and it's been a large one, thankfully. City in Virginia becomes the first to pass anti-drone legislation. The resolution bans all municipal agencies from buying or leasing drones. Charlottesville, Virginia, has become the first city in the United States to formally pass an anti-drone resolution. The resolution passed this past Monday, that would be February 4th, quote, calls on the United States Congress and the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Virginia to adopt legislation prohibiting information obtained from the domestic use of drones from being introduced into a federal or state court, and, quote, pledges to abstain from similar uses with city-owned, leased, or borrowed drones. The resolution passed by a 3-2 vote and was brought to the City Council by activist David Swanson and the Rutherford Institute, a civil liberties group based in the city. The measure also endorses a proposed 2-year moratorium on drones in Virginia. Councilmember Dee Dee Smith, who voted in favor of the bill, says that drones are, quote, pretty clearly a threat to our constitutional right of privacy. If we don't get out ahead of it to establish some guidelines for how drones are used, they will be used in a very invasive way, and we'll be left to try and pick up the pieces. The passed resolution is much less restrictive than the draft Swanson originally introduced, which would have sought to declare the city a no-drone zone and would have tried to ban all drones over Charlottesville airspace to the extent compatible with federal law. The draft would have also banned all Charlottesville municipal agencies from buying, leasing, borrowing, or testing any drones. Councilmember Dave Morris says the city has a long tradition of promoting civil liberties. It's just part of our culture here. And James, I'll throw it back to you with the note that I kind of wish this were happening in my home state of West Virginia, but positive nonetheless.
It is positive, isn't it? And there must be something in the water there in Virginia, because this is also where they voted to refuse to implement the NDAA not so long ago. So this is good. It's another excellent example of taking it down to the local level instead of basically relying on the federal government to implement everything. And again, it just goes to show that there can be these federal policies and laws, but if they're not implemented by real people in your local community, then they don't have any effect on you. And it just goes to show once again what local activism can do. So I think it is a positive story. My hat's off to David Swanson for doing this. People might remember him from being an anti-Bush crusader back in the day, anti-war. It's good to see that he's still doing things of value and note there in Virginia. So definitely something that hopefully will be modeled in more places. And if it's not happening in your locality, wherever you are in the States, I hope you get out there and help to make it happen, because again, it can happen, and people on the local level can be convinced to go along with something that's reasonable, like an anti-drone ban.
So as we're talking about, kind of hopefully these bits of legislation will get spun off and replicated in other places. Some of the related stories that we'll add, and again, don't take our word for any of these stories. Please follow the links, do your own research. Washington State, you mentioned Virginia passing the anti-NDAA bill. Now in Washington State, they've introduced their own anti-NDAA bill, and it caught a lot of action just due to the viral nature online, an internet campaign along with it. So in less than 24 hours, the bill's sponsors tripled. So another happy note about Virginia as well, James, they've also moved closer to creating their own state currency. And for more on that, you can go to dailycaller.com. And James, as long as we're talking about drones, I'll throw in one note that I did find interesting. And this was something that Clyde Lewis and I were kind of asking as this standoff in Alabama went on over this past week. I'm not sure if you caught this story, James. A crazy doomsday prepper who believes in aliens had kidnapped a kid and had him in his bunker in Alabama. And they were always talking about, all the footage, and they could see what they're doing and know everything, and even know, ultimately when it was time to go and make their move. I wonder how they got that information. So, of course, it did come out later after the standoff was over. Drones fly over Alabama bunker hostage standoff. So that's how they knew exactly what was going on in there. But as it was happening, they weren't letting that cat out of the bag, so to speak. So of course it was.
Yeah, exactly right. But once again, absolutely, the Washington State's another great example, and Virginia moving to a state currency. Again, it's just more examples of people working on a local level. I think it's a great story.
For our second story, James, and this is one of those that, again, it seems like in a way technology moves so quickly that you do sometimes have to stop and admit, like, I don't really totally understand this, but I need to spend more time with it. Scientists 3D print with human embryonic stem cells. This coming from popsci.com. 3D printers can produce gun parts, aircraft wings, food, and a lot more. But this new 3D printed product may be the craziest thing yet. Human embryonic stem cells. Using stem cells as the ink in a 3D printer, researchers in Scotland hope to eventually build 3D printed organs and tissues. A team at Heriot-Watt University used a specially designed valve-based technique to deposit whole live cells onto a surface in a specific pattern. Now, hang on here. Here we go. The cells were floating in a bio-ink, to use the terminology of the researchers who developed this technique. They were able to squeeze out tiny droplets containing 5 cells or fewer per droplet in a variety of shapes and sizes. To produce clumps of cells, the team printed out cells first and then overlaid those with cell-free bio-ink, resulting in larger droplets or spheroids of cells. The cells would grow, or would group together rather, inside those spheroids. The size of the spheroid is key because stem cells need certain conditions to work properly. This is why precisely controlled 3D printing could be so valuable for stem cell research. After being squeezed out of a thin valve, the cells were still alive and viable and able to transform into any other cell in the body, the researchers say. It's the first time anyone has printed human embryonic stem cells, said lead researcher Will Shu, a professor at Heriot-Watt. But the question is, and I'll throw it back to you, James, why?
Well, why indeed? Well, what an incredible story, isn't it? Isn't this just absolutely unbelievable? And of course, it is still technology that's developing, so we'll have to see if it'll actually work out in the way that they say it will. But at any rate, it's a step in that direction. And can you imagine how fundamentally this will transform medical technologies as we know them? So just an incredible technology. And again, this is part of that 3D printing revolution that I've been talking about. And it just keeps getting crazier and crazier when you start thinking about the different things that can be accomplished with this technology. So again, it starts to reach into pretty much every level and every layer of everything that can be conceivably constructed through these techniques. And we're not only talking about manufacturing clothes or computer parts or things like that, although that's possible too, or even gun parts. But now we're talking about actual tissues and human organs and things. It's a crazy world we're moving into, and I hope people are at least aware of this 3D printing technology, because I really do think it's going to transform the face of the planet in the next half century.
So we'll include in our related notes not only your recent episodes that you've done on 3D printing, but we'll also, there was a Wired magazine cover story just a month or two ago, and we'll link you to that full cover story. The new MakerBot replicator might just change your world, and that's essentially what we were just saying, James.
It is, and we are also getting into that sci-fi loop where apparently these 3D printers can print a lot of their own parts. So we're getting to this stage where you might be able to 3D print a 3D printer someday. So that's quite incredible.
Which, yeah, again, sounds ridiculous, like a bread maker. But these things are actually happening, and these are I think the positive things that we can look at, and hopefully again in this sort of all positive New World Next Week episode. James, we'll continue our technological turn with our third and final story this week that we get from Glenn Beck's The Blaze, but they grab it from, of course, the Washington Post's Slate. Now you can encrypt your calls and texts to protect them from being spied on. There are those there are those who might be concerned about spying by the government, hackers, or someone else on their phone calls and or text messages. Well, now there's an app for that. According to Slate, the firm Silent Circle has released a smartphone app that encrypts data. As Ryan Gallagher for Slate puts it, quote, that means photographs, videos, spreadsheets, you name it, sent scrambled from one person to another in a matter of seconds, end quote. The company's press release stated that the Silent Phone app is available for both Apple and Android devices. It's described as the first peer-to-peer encryption tool for smartphones and tablets, which means information does not pass through a third party. The related note I'll throw in there quickly, James, is one of our heroes. We've kind of watched the story over the last year or so. Dotcom, he did a pretty in-depth interview with Russia Today just a couple of days ago where he said, among many other things, I want to encrypt half of the internet. Total government spying must stop. James?
Well, two very important points to this story. The first one, regarding the encryption and the Silent Circle, I'm hesitant to be too ecstatic about this, and I would follow along the lines of a commenter. The first comment on this story by the Iggy's is, yeah, I'm sure there's no way the NSA and their endless stream of MIT grads will ever be able to break this code. So I, too, share that skepticism. But having said that, at the very least, it is good for encrypting against other people who are trying to hack into your messages. So I'm sure the NSA has a backdoor into pretty much anything that's going to appear, especially on an iOS device. I'm pretty sure Apple is in bed with the NSA every single way. But at any rate, people should look into it as a possible measure to help improve their security. But as it comes to Dotcom, as people noticed recently, I did call him a snake in the grass, and I stand by that. If people look into his history, they'll find that he's been cooperative with governments at a lot of different levels, at a lot of different times in his hacking past, where he was more than happy to sell out his users and for government purposes. And I'm pretty sure he'll do that again. All he's in it for is the money, which he admits himself. So I'm sure if there was a lucrative enough offer, and again, I'm pretty sure that this new mega that he's trying to launch wouldn't be able to get off the ground without government support or tacit approval at this stage because of the things that he's undergoing. So I'm very cautious when it comes to Dotcom, but I'm happy that at the very least he's giving lip service to promoting security and encryption on the internet. And regardless of whether Dotcom or anyone else is promoting it, people should be looking into it and trying to implement it. So again, let's move forward in trying to work with encryption, but I think people should be realistic about how likely they are to get around the NSA and the other alphabet soup agencies who have the back door to the entire internet.
Yeah, I don't want to maybe be misunderstood when I called him heroic. I think just the story itself and the way it kind of played out over the last year or so makes it sort of you kind of always want to root for the underdog, I suppose. And maybe in a way, this is kind of a callback to a story we did a couple of weeks ago about the privacy visor. The idea that again, this is a positive thing, but there is going to be that battle back and forth of course, the alphabet agencies are going to have the back door because major multinational corporations like AT&T and God knows who else are always going to give them the keys to that back door if they didn't help them build it in the first place, James.
Unfortunately so, and once again, I would suggest people take a look back at my interview with John Young a couple of years ago and his comments on how there's no such thing as 100% encryption on the internet, and I fear that he's right. But at any rate, once again, that doesn't mean that we should all be cowering in fear and hiding what we're trying to say, etc., etc. It should mean that if we really aren't the criminals, we're really trying to expose the criminals, so we really do have nothing to hide in that sense. And at any rate, the more people who self-censor and cower in fear because of this spying technology, the more that they win in the end. So again, look into Silent Circle, come to your own conclusions about this type of encryption technology, but at any rate, let's move forward spreading the information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. James, in closing, I'll just point folks to my jobby job at groundzeromedia.org, where just a couple of nights ago, for folks interested in the pop culture world, we did a pretty epic examination of the Super Bowl mega ritual. So for folks interested in that, go check out the Monday night podcast, which also features yours truly. You. Because it's setting up, of course, this is that time of year where now upcoming we'll have the Grammys and then we'll have the Oscars, and it's just all massive, entertainment industrial complex mega rituals, which, as we've said time and time again, is symbols seen by many yet understood by few.
Excellent. Well, also on a Corbett report note, a lot of people have been asking for part 2 of my conversation with Sibel Edmonds. We are going to be recording it tomorrow, so it should be out this weekend, so people can look forward to that. But on that note, let's leave it there. James, once again, 3 great stories. I'm looking forward to talking to you again next week.
As always, man, I appreciate it. Thanks.